Talking to myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot see.
Morning all, welcome to Eddie Howe's press conference review with me, Steve Raitt, on NUFC matters. First up was Razor from BBC Radio Newcastle asking about the fitness of the players after the Arsenal game. He said it was a very physical game, but from that game there was just a few bumps and bruises and nothing standing out. Razor was next on about Alexander Isak, a couple of questions about him. Basically, Eddie Howe said, with regards to the game tomorrow, let's get through training today. I'm not clear on what side I'm going to pick, but Alexander Isak is getting closer all the time. He asked as well how frustrated he was, and he said, look, initially it was a huge disappointment, but now he is in a better place. Razor moved on to the FA Cup and said, how do you balance, an FA Cup run with the league and with the obviously the quarter-final coming up on Tuesday and the Carabao Cup? And he just says, look, I'll take the fixtures and I'll take the congested fixture list. He says, I've got to get the balance right. There's a lot to think about. And he says, as always, I assess that in training. We want to win the game. We want to push on and in all competitions. But, I'll assess the players at the training sessions. Razor also mentioned last year's FA Cup game against Cambridge, which is a big disappointment for the fans and for Eddie and the players. And he just said, look, I want to avoid that kind of thing, moving forward. He says people are always going to make an assessment on the team that I pick tomorrow. He says, and it's going to be a difficult game. He says, because Sheffield Wednesday are having a great season. Also asked about Elliot Anderson by Razor. Look, just saying that, this lad hasn't really featured a great deal, more or less asking if he was going to go out on loan. He said, look, he's very valued here. He's had a few niggles, which has caused him a few issues, but he's as fit as he can be now, which is great. And he is going nowhere in this window. So very simple answer to a very simple question. Keith Downey from Sky was up next, asking how the midfield three were coping with the workload that they've been asked to do and the physicalities, again, pointing back to the game against Arsenal. He just said, look, the physical exertion of the group shouldn't be underestimated. He says, we don't have great strength and depth in that area. He says, of course, the current players in that position and in those positions are enjoying playing. But obviously with the injury to John Joe Shelby especially, it leaves them short in that area. Is that a pointer perhaps to who Newcastle might try and bring in this window? Keith moved on to his question about the FA Cup. And again harked back to Cambridge last year, saying that was probably the biggest low point in Newcastle's time under Eddie Howe, and Eddie Howe agreed. He said, yeah, it was a low point, but we've had an upward trajectory since then. Lots has changed, and the confidence levels that we have now, and the way that we play. So use that really as a bit of a springboard into what has developed over the last 12 months. Also talking about defensive plaudits, and the fact that maybe he wasn't praised for his defense before he came to Newcastle. He says, look, I pride myself still on the attacking prowess that my teams were known for. He says, we haven't changed our principles of play, coming from our previous club. He says, but there has been a slight change in our work, in the way that we do things. And he says, maybe that, as a coaching team with these players, we are defensively more drilled. And he says there's a mentality defending, and the players have got it. He says they've been superb. Keith also asked him about David Dean's radical idea about potentially reducing the game of football to 60 minutes. Keith mentioned that the game against Arsenal, the ball was in play 54 minutes, against Leeds 48 minutes. He did basically, he said he hadn't heard what David Dean had said, but he did say that he's not one for radical rule changes. He says he's all for the fans getting value for money. And he was pushed a little bit by Keith on the fact that, Newcastle were criticised for the way that they played that game against Arsenal, the way that the way that they went about their business. And he just said, look, different games require different styles, and again, pointing to the Leeds game, he said, we didn't beat Leeds because, of ourselves, not because of the way Leeds played. He says, we weren't good enough on the day to break them down. So very good answer, I have to say. Transfers were the next on Keith's agenda. Again, he just said, look, things could change in the window. This was never going to be a window for early business. It was never going to be the case. And he just said, look, we're taking stock of what we've got day by day, but nothing is imminent. There'll be more on that later. Nisha from the BBC was next up and saying the FA Cup, how important is it to him? He said, well, as a player, I never got to the later stages, but I did score a few goals. He says, as a manager, he says, with Bournemouth, it was always about staying in the league. He says, the Carabao Cup was one we always give a good shot to. He says, but 9 times out of 10, we ended up in a relegation position. So the FA Cup, we were thinking more about staying up than progressing. But it says it's a special cup competition for him. Nisha also said, is this game an opportunity for other players, fringe players, to get in? This game and potentially the Leicester game and Fulham game, 3 games in a week. So, is there an opportunity for maybe ASM was the name that you mentioned? And he just said, look, I've not picked the team yet. We've got another training session to go. He says, but yes, he says these kind of games give other players an opportunity to stake a claim. But he says it's also important to not lose the rhythm that you've got yourselves into. Nisha then pushed him on transfers again. She said, is the picture getting clearer as time passes as to what we might bring in or what we might need? And again, only time he mentioned it today, but he mentioned financial fair play. And he just simply said that is impacting on what we can do in this window. Simple as that. I think we all know that. Damien asked about Arteta being animated and his response to that in the game earlier in the week. And he just said, any regrets to the way that he handled it? And he went, look, I've got to be strong for my club and my team in certain moments. And, I've got no regrets over that. I've just got to make sure that I maintain my discipline and keep cool. And he just said, I think the referee versus Arsenal was very strong and certainly made the right decisions. What he could have, I guess, made a hash of it in the last minute and given them a penalty. It wouldn't have been deserved. I think that was a very fair result against Arsenal. Again, Damien asking about the physical demands to players. And he just said, look, there's a delicate balance to helping players not get fatigued. He says that's very important. He says we've got protocols in place, which we follow, on a day-to-day basis. He says the facilities are important. And of course, Newcastle are developing the facilities and making them better and more comfortable for the players. And he just said as well, we look after our players mentally and physically. He says we we talk to the players a lot. So says that's very important. Miles was next up from the Shields Gazette asking about Dubravka. Is he fit and is he ready to play? Well, he was on the bench against Arsenal, of course. And he said, yep, he is fit. We haven't seen a great deal of him, but, what we've seen we like. And yes, he is fit and he is ready to play if required. Also pushed on the fact that we've got a top heavy amount of keepers at the club. And he said, yeah, Martin's return was slightly unexpected. And it does give us that issue. And it's something that we're going to be certainly looking at over the next few weeks. Craig Hope was up next about the squad depth, and he said, are you happy with it? He says, when the squad's all fully fit, I am. He says, but it's not so strong with the injuries that were sustained to John Joe and Matt Targett. He says both of them were a huge blow. He says, of course, that makes the transfer talk interesting, but again, harking back to what he said to Nisha, you're looking at this on a day-to-day basis and assessing every day. He also said, Craig again pushing it, saying, does the progression in cups dictate the transfer incomings and outgoings? Shall we say we get through against Sheffield Wednesday and then we get to a semi-final? Is that going to dictate? And he went, no. He says an injury list is what dictates the transfers, not the games that we have to play. Craig, final question was, did Arteta apologise or seek him out after the game? And he went, no. He says there's no need to apologise. That was just 2 football managers showing passion and caring for the respective teams. Ian Murtagh from the Daily Star was next up, again pushing back to the defensive record, and does he feel vindicated with the results that he's getting, and the fact that we've gone 6 games keeping 6 clean sheets. And he just said, look, defensive record wasn't what I wanted at Bournemouth, and it was just the way that it turned out, But from his perspective, he he always feels that he was getting his principles right and doing things right, but at this moment in time, he keeps putting a lot of praise on the players for what they've done. They're listening to what they want them to do. They're buying into what they want them to do, and they're doing it. And he says coaching is the key to getting results from players, and the players have to respond, and these are. Ian also asked about Shaw, because obviously he's part of a very successful back five, and he says he's the survivor from the previous manager and the other era. He says, how important is he? He says, look, I've always rated him. I've rated his qualities. He said he's very good technically. He said his vision on the ball is second to none. He reads the game well, and he's very diligent in defending. So a lot of praise for Fabian Schär. Scott was next up. I think it's Scott from the Northern Echo, perhaps, and he's asking about Jamal Lewis. Where's he at? And he's in his comeback, and Eddie just said he's in a good place. He said he had injury issues. He specified that it was his pelvis, and that he didn't feel quite right and felt he couldn't do what he wanted to do with that injury. Described him as an incredible athlete. Said he'd become accustomed to our principles of play, and he said he'll produce when he gets his chance. He said there's so many games ahead, and he just has to take his chance like everybody does when they get it. He says Dan Burn, who obviously sees himself as a centre half, but is doing really well in left back. It's going to be hard to push out of that position. He says Dummett's injured and Target's injured, but says overall they like Jamal Lewis as a player. Will he get a chance tomorrow? Who knows? Martin was next up, asking any changes that he would like to make in the game. Just harking back to David Dean's suggestion that we go for a 60-minute game of football. He went, well, I'm not a big fan of injury time, huge injury time. He says it's up to refs to control the speed of the game better. But other than that, no other comment on that. Martin asked him about the FA Cup. He said he heard Bobby Moncur on the radio. Of course, the man who last lifted the trophy back in '69, and just was he aware of that? And does that play its part? And he said, of course it does. He says, myself and the players would love to be able to create our own history. And in 100 years' time, he'd love that if the people were talking about, Newcastle United's team under Eddie Howe. He said, we want to leave a positive mark. Kieran was next up, asking how Eddie had made the team more streetwise. And he just says, simply constantly evaluating our performances. He says the experienced players we've brought in have helped. He says, and I think we've got a nice mix of youth and experience. And he says, do you think the likes of Arsenal and Spurs and Liverpool have changed the perception of how we are viewed? And again, he rolled out that line, which I do love. He said it earlier in the season. We're not here to be popular. It's our job. And we go about our job in a particular way. Lee Ryder asked about Newcastle's history of fielding weak teams in this competition, and does he just toss history aside and concentrate on getting the best out of the players that he's got and putting the right team out, the strongest team out? He said, look, you don't toss history aside. He said, I like to analyse the strengths and weaknesses of the opposition. He said, again, reiterated it's a tough game against Sheffield Wednesday tomorrow. He says we shouldn't underestimate them. He says, they've got quality players and they've got a good manager. And he again, Lee asked him about Sheffield Wednesday, and he just said, look, they're an experienced team, outstanding season. They play a nice style of football. He says they've got a good mix of, game players and physical players. And he says Darren's done a good job. And he says they've got momentum. He says, which we know only too well is a powerful thing. He says our quality needs to show to win the game. Simple as that. Lee asked him about Jamal Lascelles as well. Obviously not getting a game. I mean, booked twice and not even on the pitch. But he just said, look, his professionalism strikes me every day, and I know that I can rely on him. He's waiting in the wings and ready to take an opportunity if needed. And Lee also praised him on the fact that, he was still trying to win the game at Arsenal with the substitutions. And it was interesting this because he said we had good attacking options on the bench. He says, but we needed to find a way to win without detriment to our defensive operations. And I thought that was an interesting answer, because I think a lot of talk amongst all of us Newcastle fans on the podcasts that everybody does and in the bars and clubs and wherever you chat Newcastle United, there's been that, he didn't bring ASM on, he brought Murphy on. And I think that's very telling. He doesn't mention it. That's my assessment of that. But I just think, yeah, you didn't bring ASM on because you didn't trust him. And I hark back to the Chelsea game last season at Stamford Bridge, where ASM came on as the sub that we all thought would come on and win the game. But I remember standing there going, oh no, he's not going to buy into this defensive game. And he didn't. And it wasn't his fault directly that we lost the game, but it just, he just doesn't defend. And I might be completely wrong, but that was the answer that I took from that answer that Eddie Howe gave. Jordan was asking about Cole, asking where he was, where he could end up, and he just said, look, he says, we've seen him around this week. It's been good. We've had a couple of chats. We're going to loan him out. We've got to find the right club for him, and it's very important to find a good club. He's got to gain experience of the British game. He's still very young. He's got areas to improve, but we know we've got a really good player there. Jordan asked him about Ryan Fraser as well. A lot of talk about Ryan Fraser potentially moving in this window and demanding to go. But he said he's training and he's working hard to get his place back in the squad. Last, Keith Downey came back and asked about Isak. He said, how excited was he to see Isak back in the black and white strip? And he said, very excited. He says, and if and when we do see him, it'll be a huge lift to the squad. So as always, great press conference from Eddie Howe. Always good to hear what the gaffer has to say. I'll be back before Tuesday's game with another Eddie Howe's press conference. Don't forget to join us tonight, 5 o'clock, 3 Amigos, and that starts at 5 o'clock tonight. Okay, playing out with the ads. A big thank you to all our sponsors, as always. Thanks to Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, and our website skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free, and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to Garden of Healing Dispensaries, CBD hemp and cannabinoid specialists. You can find them at thegohd.com. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria, and you can find them at mrvickies.co.uk. If you want to make an order, give them a call on 01768 210 102 or email info@mrvickies.co.uk. Thanks to Blowhole Breweries, you can get a selection of beers, and the cans are in the design of the old Newcastle United entertainers strips. Blowholebrewery.co.uk. Thanks to Melly's Carpets and Beds, laying our reputation, one recommendation at a time. The best quality around at the cheapest prices. Melly's Beds and Carpets.co.uk. Email sales@mellysbedsandcarpets.co.uk or give Melly a call on 01670 632 216. And thanks to United Group Travel Limited, UK Coach Holidays in Morpeth, 01670 362 460 or mobile 07957 141 654. Graham, your driver, Beverly answering your calls and looking after you on your tour. Some great deals coming up there. Get yourself onto the website to check them out. Thanks also to Media Arts, who do all of our videos and help us with the technological side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the channel, then hit the subscribe button below. Hit the thumb up, which is the like button, which does us a big favour with the algorithm. And click share. Share it to Newcastle United, Facebook groups or Twitter accounts or your own social media to help our community grow. And if you want to join the channel, hit the join button. And for as little as $1.99 a month, you can get some members-only videos and chances to win some fantastic prizes. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. Don't forget as well that we do events through NUFC Matters. And this one is the next event coming up, Friday the 24th of February, an evening with Newcastle United legend Steve Howe. Friday the 24th of February, Tyneside Irish Centre, and tickets are available at £50 from newcastlelegends.com. If you also go onto Voucher and search for the event, you can pick up a bargain on there. Don't forget, we also support the food bank on this channel. www.nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk is where you can find the Matchday Bucket. You can make a virtual donation to the Matchday Bucket 365 days of the year to keep helping the food bank in Newcastle.